Elevator at the Old Hospital. Based on a true story submitted by Samantha Lim. Working the night shift at any hospital is unsettling, but this one, the Old Hospital in Kuala Lumpur, had an entirely different feel. The building itself was a relic, its walls steeped in decades of history. Rumors swirled among the staff about the strange occurrences, the lingering spirits, and the floors that no one spoke about. But I had never seen anything unusual during my shifts, until that night. I was a nurse, assigned to the quietest ward of the hospital. My duties were simple: monitor the few patients that remained in the old building and make rounds every couple of hours. It was usually peaceful, if not a little eerie. But that night was different. The air felt thick, heavy with something I couldn't quite place. At around 3 a.m., I finished my rounds and headed toward the lift to take a quick break. The hospital was deserted, as it usually was during the night shift. The only sounds were the faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead and the soft squeak of my shoes against the polished floor. I pressed the button for the elevator, watching the old-fashioned needle hover as the lift made its slow descent from the upper floors. When the doors slid open with a quiet ding, I stepped inside and pressed the button for the ground floor. The elevator hummed to life, and I leaned against the wall, exhausted from the shift. But as the lift passed the second floor, it jolted to a sudden stop. The overhead lights flickered once, twice, and then steadied. I frowned and glanced at the panel above the doors. It showed we had stopped on the 4th floor. But that didn't make sense. There was no 4th floor. My breath caught in my throat. I knew every floor of the hospital, and the building map was engraved in my mind. The 4th floor hadn't existed for years. It had been sealed off decades ago after a fire had gutted it, leaving it abandoned and inaccessible. No one ever spoke about it, and the elevator was never supposed to stop there. I hesitated for a moment, my finger hovering over the button to close the doors. But something, curiosity, fear, or both, kept me from pressing it. Slowly, the doors slid open, revealing a dimly lit corridor. The air that rushed in was cold, far colder than the rest of the hospital. It smelled damp, like old concrete, and carried with it a strange metallic tang. I stepped closer to the threshold, peering out into the hallway. The lights overhead flickered faintly, casting long shadows along the cracked walls. For a moment, I thought I saw movement, a figure darting out of sight at the far end of the corridor. My heart pounded in my chest, and I took a step back, my instincts screaming at me to stay inside the lift. But the lift didn't move. It remained motionless, as if waiting for me to make a decision. I pressed the button for the ground floor again, but nothing happened. The lights flickered once more, and a low, almost imperceptible hum filled the air, like the sound of distant machinery groaning to life. The thought of stepping out onto that floor was terrifying, but staying in the elevator felt worse. I knew I had to get out of there, fast. Just as I was about to press the emergency button, the silence was shattered by a distant sound, faint but unmistakable, a soft, echoing cry. I froze. It was coming from down the hallway, from somewhere deep within the 4th floor. I didn't want to go, but I couldn't ignore the sound. I found myself stepping forward, crossing the threshold of the elevator and into the forgotten corridor. The cold air wrapped around me, chilling me to the bone as I made my way slowly down the hallway. The cry grew louder, more distinct, but it wasn't a cry of pain. It sounded like a child. The room was small, almost claustrophobic, with a single bed pushed against the far wall. A dim, flickering light bulb hung from the ceiling, casting a sickly yellow glow over everything. My eyes scanned the room, but there was nothing out of the ordinary, no sign of anyone, no trace of the source of the cry. But then, my gaze fell on the bed. The sheets were disheveled, as though someone had been lying there only moments ago. and on the pillow there was a faint imprint, small, as if from the head of a child. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic, mixed with something else, something metallic and sour, like blood. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Was this some kind of abandoned ward? An old patient room that had been forgotten when the floor was closed off? But why would the elevator have stopped here? And where was the child whose cries had led me down the hallway? I approached the bed, my footsteps echoing unnaturally in the silent room. As I reached out to touch the pillow, the door behind me creaked, closing slowly on its own. My heart lurched, and I spun around, but there was no one there. Suddenly, the light bulb flickered violently, and the room plunged into darkness. Panic surged through me, and I scrambled to find my phone, fumbling with trembling hands until I finally managed to turn on the flashlight. The beam of light cut through the darkness, but the child was gone. My breathing was ragged as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. The room was empty, the bed untouched. Had I imagined the whole thing? Was my mind playing tricks on me? But then, I heard it again, the soft cry, echoing down the hallway outside the door. This time, it was fainter, more distant, but still unmistakable. I couldn't stay there any longer. I bolted for the door, throwing it open and racing down the hallway. The elevator was still there, the doors wide open as if it had been waiting for me the whole time. I jumped inside, slamming the button for the ground floor. The doors slid shut, and the elevator began its slow, creaky descent. My heart pounded in my chest, and I prayed that I would reach the lobby without any more strange encounters. When the doors finally opened onto the lobby, I ran out, gasping for air as I burst into the brightly lit space. I glanced around, half expecting to see something lurking in the shadows, but everything was normal. Nurses were going about their duties, and the soft hum of hospital life filled the air. I stared at the small figure, my heart pounding in my chest. He didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there, his hollow eyes locked onto mine. His lips parted again, and he whispered, "Help me." The words sent a chill through my entire body. I wanted to help him, to do something, but I didn't know how. My legs felt like they were made of stone, my feet rooted to the floor as I stood frozen in place. Before I could move, the child took another step forward, his small hand reaching out toward me. I recoiled, stepping back into the darkness of the room. My back hit the cold, hard wall, and I gasped, my pulse racing. Suddenly, the lights flickered again, and the room was plunged into darkness. Panic surged through me, and I scrambled to find my phone, fumbling with trembling hands until I finally managed to turn on the flashlight. The beam of light cut through the darkness, but the child was gone. My breathing was ragged as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. The room was empty, the bed untouched. Had I imagined the whole thing? Was my mind playing tricks on me? But then, I heard it again, the soft cry, echoing down the hallway outside the door. This time, it was fainter, more distant, but still unmistakable. I couldn't stay there any longer. I bolted for the door, throwing it open and racing down the hallway. The elevator was still there, the doors wide open as if it had been waiting for me the whole time. I jumped inside, slamming the button for the ground floor. The doors slid shut, and the elevator began its slow, creaky descent. My heart pounded in my chest, and I prayed that I would reach the lobby without any more strange encounters. When the doors finally opened onto the lobby, I ran out, gasping for air as I burst into the brightly lit space. I glanced around, half expecting to see something lurking in the shadows, but everything was normal. Nurses were going about their duties, and the soft hum of hospital life filled the air. I didn't tell anyone what had happened. Who would believe me? A ghost? A child trapped in an abandoned ward? It sounded ridiculous, even to me. But I knew what I had seen. I knew what I had heard. The next day, I returned to the hospital, determined to find out more. I asked some of the older nurses about the 4th floor, about the old elevator that still seemed to stop there even though it wasn't supposed to. Most of them dismissed it as nothing more than superstition, but one nurse, an older woman who had worked at the hospital for over 30 years, pulled me aside. "There's something you need to know," as she said, her voice low and cautious. The 4th floor wasn't just closed because of the fire. There was something else. Something they didn't want anyone to know. I frowned. "What do you mean?" She glanced around, making sure no one was listening, before continuing. "Years ago, before the fire, that floor housed a special ward. It was where they kept their difficult patients, the ones who couldn't be cured. Most of them were children. They were kept there, out of sight, out of mind. After the fire, they said everyone had been evacuated, but there were rumors. Rumors that some of the children didn't make it out." A chill ran down my spine as her words sank in. The child in the hospital gown. The cries in the dark. It all made sense now. "They say the spirits of those children still linger there," the nurse continued. "They're trapped, waiting for someone to help them find peace. But no one knows how." I left the hospital that day with a heavy heart. I didn't know if I could help the spirits trapped on the 4th floor, but I couldn't ignore what I had experienced. The old hospital, with its crumbling walls and forgotten wards, was more than just a place for the living. It was a place where the past and present blurred, where the spirits of the lost still roamed, searching for a way out. And I knew that as long as the hospital stood, they would remain there, waiting in the shadows.